Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Samach Aleph. We are a few lines from the bottom of Samach Amud Bet. We are at Kisalik Ravin, which is one, two, three, four, five. Second. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine. 9 lines up on Samach Amud Bet. And let me share my screen and we'll get started for real. So um, yesterday, Abaye taught us that just as a Bechor cannot be eaten when the altar is damaged, the same thing is true for all Kodshim Kalim in general. And so as we pick up on the ninth line from the bottom of Samach Hamabet, the Gemara records a different view. So Kisalik Ravin, when Ravin left and he went to Eretz Yisrael from Bavel, Amra Lishmaita Kamei de Rabbi Yirmiyah. He taught over what Abaye had said to Rabbi Yirmiyah. Amar and Rabbi Yirmiyah said in response, Bavloi Tipshoi, those foolish Babylonians. So I'm told the Yasvi, Ba'ara Chashocha, Amre Shmaita de Machashka. Since they're sitting in a dark land, they say things that are dark, meaning there's something that he missed. Lo Shemiya Lahu Hadatanya. Obviously, he missed the following Bryce. Shabishas Siluk Masos. That when the Mishkan was traveling. So Kudshim Nifsalin. So the Kodshe Kudshim would be disqualified. V'zavim unsoraim mishtalchim chutz l'mechitza, and the Zavim and the Mitzoraim would need to leave outside the areas where they would still need to be. So even though they were traveling and therefore the camp wasn't set up, and so a Zav is allowed into the camp even of the Levium, but a Mitzorah is sent out even of the camp of the Yisraelim, and so you would need to be outside those respective camps even while traveling. Vitanya Idach, and we have another place where it says, another brisa, B'shnei Mekomos Kodshim Ne'achalim, that in two places the Kodshim can be eaten. So my love, Habakodshe Kodshim. So how do we qualify? And the suggestion is, what does it mean? Well, let's take a look at a couple of Rashis, right?
I
So
think the Zav has to leave the Machna Levim.
the Machane Levim. Oh, well, we'll see. We'll see it in a moment. So um, could be. The Zav has to leave the Mach. But let's take a look at Rashi. B'shas silu kamasos kishimoridin es hamishkan, when they take down the Mishkan, the top line in the medium wide lines of Rashi. Or in the widest lines of Rashi at the bottom. Kishimoridin es hamishkan, when they take down the Mishkan, umisalken es mizbechos, and remove the Mizbeach, at the time that they're traveling in the wilderness. Kodshim nisolim. So basar kodshim kodshim. Rashi is telling us how we're going to initially propose to understand this. The meat of the kodshim kodshim, because salka daitich mibnei siluk mihamizbeachu, and we think that at the moment it's because of the removal of the mizbeach that this is required, not the deconstruction of the Mishkan. Midikatani b'zavim u'mitzorin mishtalchin, from the fact that we say that the zavim and the mitzorain are sent out. She'ein mitzorin nichlas l'deglei hashvatim, because as we said, a mitzora can't go into the tribe area at all. Below Zav l'machaneh Levim. You're right, exactly. And the Zav can't go even into the Levite tribe, so he can go into the Yisrael tribe, into Yisrael spots. So if he's a Yisrael, he can be in his own home, but he can't go anywhere closer to the Mishkan. No say ha'aron, Levim no say Aaron, to those who are carrying the Aron. Kida amrin and lekaman, as we will see, God willing, tomorrow. Afal pi shenasa ohel moed, even though the Ohel Moed is traveling, Afal Pisha Nasa, excuse me, Ohel Moed who, even though we will see tomorrow that even though or maybe at the end of today, we will see that although the Ohel Moed is traveling, it remains being called an Ohel Moed. Alma, so we see nifsalin, when we say that the kodshim is nifsalin, the ka'amar that we're saying, la mishum de mifsale biyotze. It's not because now that there's no mishkan, somehow it could be a case where the meat has gone out and therefore it's not edible. No, there is still a sense of the mishkan camps in the even when they're traveling. Biyotzehu, daha oel moed chashiv lei, because the oel moed is still considered the oel moed, and so as a result, if you are presumably among the walls of the oel moed when it's traveling, you would still be considered inside the oel moed, and that would not be a reason for saying that it's puzzle. But instead, it's puzzle presumably because the mizbeach has been moved. And we say, then there's another brisa that says, B'shnei mekomos ne'echalin, continuing on in Rashi. Now we're 5 lines up from the bottom of Rashi. Chad b'mekoman, one place that you can eat is when the Mishkan is where it's supposed to be. B'machanot, ha'amurot behen, whatever camps you're allowed to eat within. So for some things, you can eat it only within the Mishkan, and some you can go out further and even eat in the general camp. Mishkan b'mikomo, and it's all when the Mishkan is in its place. V'chad b'kol makom sheyehei sham derech halichasan, and one is saying even when it's traveling, mishanaso, when it's going on the travels. V'kashan ahadadi, and this would seem to contradict one another. And so how do we explain it? So Amar Ravina, idi v'idi, because I'm sorry. So my love, how do we explain it? This is Ravin. Excuse me, Rabbi Yirmiyah speaking. Habakadshim kadshim. That one is in connection with Kodshe Kachim, that's when it's going to be prohibited. Habakadshim kalim. And one is when it's Kachim kalim. And so that's how we can explain it. So
What are we explaining here? It's a little confusing.
so there are two brises. One says that you're not allowed to have kudshim. The kudshim are become disqualified when the mishkan is traveling, and one says that you can eat kodesh in two places. And then we understand two places, as explained by Rashi, as one when the Mishkan is standing and one when the Mishkan is traveling. So those are the two places. So the second brisa seems to explicitly say that you can have kodshim when the Mishkan is traveling. But the first one said that the kodshim is puzzle when the Mishkan is traveling. So how do we resolve it? So the answer that Rabbi Yirmiyah proposes is that one is kodshim and kodshe kodshim. And so as a result, that's why it's going to be prohibited. And one is kodshim kalim, and that's why it's going to be permitted. And so that seems to have been ignored by Abaye, who said that in fact Kodshim Kalim cannot be eaten. Right here, we're saying Kodshim Kalim can be eaten when the Mishkan is traveling, and Rabbi said that if the Mishkan is if the Mizbeach is not set up, then you can't eat Kodshim Kalim at all. So Amar Ravina,
When it's traveling, when it's traveling, right? That's what we're talking
well,
about.
when it's traveling, when there's something wrong with the mizbeach, the Abaye's statement is when there's something wrong with the mizbeach, right? If we go back to when Abaye made his statement, he said his statement in connection with the fact that if it's not standing, then it would be a problem.
So in general, if there's no mizbeach, it's not functioning, it's broken, it's whatever it may be. So in the
Correct.
case where it's
Exactly.
traveling, there's no mizbeach.
Correct.
It took it down.
Exactly. So that seems to contradict him. So Ravina comes to Abaye's defense. Amar Ravini, no. Amar Ravina, idi v'kachim kalim. We could say that both of them are talking about kachim kalim. And why did it say in one place that it's prohibited? Below kasha, it's not difficult as we turn to Samach Aleph Amud Aleph, which is a very short daf. Ha Rebbe Yishmael, Ha Rabbanan. One is Rebbe Yishmael. That was the basis. That's the one who says it's prohibited, right? Because that was the basis that we said as Rashi says, the Yalif Basar Midam Basraisa Rabbanan. That I'm sorry, the Yalif Basar Midam. That he is the one who learns meat from blood. That just as the blood needs to have the mizbeach in order to be able to put on it, so too the meat does, and therefore, just as the meat of a bechor is not going to be kosher, the meat of all kachim kalim is not going to be kosher if the mizbeach isn't standing. And then the other one, basraisa, the second of the baraisas, is going to be the rabbanan, who disagree with Rabbi Yishmael and say that actually you can have the offerings even when you're traveling. So therefore, Abaye's statement is consistent with Rabbi Yishmael, and that's not a problem. The Ibayasema, or alternatively, we can give a completely different interpretation. Hava ha bekudshim kudshim. Really, both statements are about kudshim kudshim, kodshe kudshim. Umay b'shnei makomos. And what do we mean when we say that there are two places and one of the places is allowed to be eaten? So one place is Kodem Shiyamidu Leviim Es HaMishkan. We're going to explain this in a moment, but it literally means before the Leviim erected the Mishkan. Rashi is going to point out that that can't be what it means. And so we're going to, in the end, or at least one of Rashi's explanations, is going to end up saying that what this really means is after the Leviim erected the Mishkan, when the Mizbeach is standing. And the second, Ula Achar, and now we return to Samach Aleph on the bed, Ula Achar Yefarku Halavim Es HaMishkan. And also, it's after the Leviim dismantled the Mishkan. However, they have not yet removed the altar. And so, although the Mishkan's no longer standing, the altar is standing. And so, what are we saying? So, we're saying that there are two places that can be eaten. Both of them involve the Mizbeach still existing. And so, that's what we're saying when we say in the Brisa that there are two places that you can that can be where we can eat Kodshe Kodshim. And again, it can refer even to Kodshe Kodshim because even the Kodshe Kodshim would be kosher as long as the Mizbeach is standing. And so as a result, there again would not necessarily be any inconsistency with Abaye, who says that as long as that again, he says that even Kodshe Kalim you can't eat when the Mizbeach is not standing. But this second brisa isn't talking about when the Mizbeach is not standing. It's talking about when the walls have been taken down, but the Mizbeach is still in its place. So let's take a look. The Ibayis Ema. We'll read these two. No, you know what? Let's get a little bit further, and then we'll go back. So Maudatema Ipsilahu biyotze, that I might have thought. So why would I think that it would be a problem? I might have thought that because the curtains around the Mishkan have been taken down, it's considered as if you took the meat out. Kamash Malan, not so. That even though the curtains are down, as long as the Mizbeach is standing, it's considered in its right place. So now let's go back and let's take a look at the two Rashis at the top of Samach Aleph Amud Aleph that we did not yet do. So we're going to do the Ibayis Ema. So v'ibayis ema bas top line, end of the top line, basraisa nami b'kodshe kodshim. We can say that even the last brisa is by kodshe kodshim. And what does it mean that we didn't eat it? Ushnei makomos. And what does it mean by the two places? Lav la'achar shenasu. It doesn't mean that, again, now he's referring to the fact where it says Kodem Shiyamidu Leviim Es HaMishkan, because we're going to point out that it can't mean that literally. So Lav La'achar Shenasu Dinistalek HaMizbeach. We're not talking about the situation where after they camped and then they removed the Mizbeach Kamar, Elachad Minaihu Kedeisa ba'od hamishkan natay kamishbato. So the second of the two explanations is exactly as it's written, meaning before the Mishkan, before the Mizbeach got moved, the Mishkan has been the walls of the Mishkan have been taken down. V'chad, and one of them means la'achar shapirku krush. I'm sorry. Chaminahu Isa Ba'od. I'm sorry. Ba'od Hamishpa. I'm sorry. I got myself confused. Chaminahu Isa Ba'od Hamishkan Natai Kamishpato. One of them, namely the first one, is going to apply when the Mishkan is still standing as it's required to be standing. V'chad la'achar shapirku krushim, and one of them is referring to after they take down the beams, the kalei chatzer and the curtains, but adayin hamizbeach b'mekomo, and the mizbeach remains in its place. The kodem sheyamidu leviim es mishkan, and it's before they start standing up the mishkan dinaka, meaning dinakat, that they're going to be taking. Hachan lav dafka nakat chada, and hacha. I'm sorry. Um, the Kodam Sheminu Levim as Mishkan Dunakat, and it's before they put back up the Mishkan. Haka Lav Davka, the reference to taking it to Kodam Sheyamidu Levim as Mishkan, right? So sorry, this is like a quote, right? And we're in the first narrow line of Rashi. The Kodam Sheyamidu Levim as Mishkan. That quote from our Gemara, the Nakat, that language, Haka Lav Dafka Nakat. It wasn't meant to be specific. And there are two reasons that it can't be specific. Chad delo mishkachla shahare kodem sheyitnu b'nei kahat.
Sheyachnu.
I'm sorry, Sheyachnu, thank you. Maybe I need a new prescription. Sheyachnu b'nei kahat, no say hamizbachot, that before the b'nei kahat, who were carrying the mizbachot, the golden and the copper altars, hayuchonim b'nei gershon u'merari, no say hamishkan umakimin oto b'nesiatam. Hayu moridin as hamishkan tchila. We'll pause before the Hayom Maridin as Mishkan. So the point is that the Bnei Kahat who are carrying the Mizbachot, they don't get to the new camping place until after the Bnei Gershon and Merari, who are carrying all the other pieces of the Mishkan, the boards and the curtains and the coverings, all of that they're covering, they get to the place first, and they already set it up so that when the Bnei Kahat get there, they just put the Aron, the Aron and the Mizbechot right into their locations. So there is no time when it's Kodem Sheyamidu Leviin as Hamishkan that the Mizbeach is still standing. So that's one reason that it can't be that we're talking about.
There's no time when there's no period when they're not standing. When say that again?
There's no period when when they reconstruct the Mishkan in the new location, in their new encampment, where the Mizbeach is standing, but the curtains around the Mizbeach are not standing. Because the whole point of having Bnei Merari and Bnei Gershon travel before Bnei Kahat in the traveling process that is described in Sefer Bamidbar is in order to enable them, when they get to the location that they're going to set up the structure so that they can put the Mizbechot and the Aron directly into the structure, into their proper locations.
Which is the function of Bnei Kahat.
The function of Bnei Kahat is to carry the Aron and the Mizbechot.
And they're the ones who bring it in to set it up, right?
Well, again, it's
it.
not completely clear whether they actually have the Kohanim do that or whether they do it directly in terms of the setting it up. Could be that they do it directly while it's covered, because of course it was traveled while it was covered. So yeah, I mean, not completely clear in the Torah that who's actually putting it in the final location and setting it up for use. But the bottom line is certainly while it's traveling, they are the ones that are holding it. And and the point is Hayum Moridin es Hamishkan Tchila, and Bnei Gershon and Merari, they would also be the ones who take down the Mishkan to begin with, meaning they v'nosin b'nei Gershon and Merari achar degel echad. They travel after the first group of Israel of the Bnei Yisrael, the first three tribes that travel. Ubnei Kahat acharei shnei degalim, and the Bnei Kahat travel after the second degel, the second set of three tribes. Kedei sheyehu kodmin b'nei Gershon b'chaniatan uma'amidin et hamishkan, because we want the Bnei Gershon to get there first and to camp and to set up the Mishkan lifnei bo b'nei Kahat, before the people of the children of Kahat come. Kediksiv achar masad dagal b'nei Yehuda. That the point is that the Kanmei Kanahat travel after Yehuda, v'hurad Mishkan, and then they take down the Mishkan, meaning that they take all the kalim with them. V'achar shnei degalim ksiv v'nasu ka'atim, and that's when the Bnei Kahat travel, is after two groups of the Bnei Yisrael. No say hamikdash dahainu aron umizbachot v'kli hashares, and the Bnei Kahat are going to be taking the aron, the altar, and the altars, and the vessels of the holy vessels. V'hikimu Bnei Gershon as hamishkan, and the children of Gershon set up the Mishkan ad boam, before they even get there. Shel Bnei Kahas, before Bnei Kahas gets there. The ode. Okay, so not only that, so that was point number one, is that if we look at the traveling and the way it's done, you would never have the Mizbeach set up before the walls of the Mishkan. So it doesn't make sense to say that Kodem Shiamidu Leviim Es HaMishkan, because our Hava Mina would be that Kodem Shiamidu Leviim Es HaMishkan means that before they set up all the walls of the Mishkan, we set up the Mizbeach, and then again, you would have that it would be kosher to eat Kodshe Kodshim. But that also doesn't make sense, meaning even if we were to try to understand this literally, V'od ibishashinu as haseder, even if they were to mix up the order, mukamat, haseder mukamat, the order of setting up the Mishkan, la mukamat la, hechi shchite shchate korbanot kodem shiamidu Mishkan. How can we have any kodshe kodshim that would be there to eat? You would have to have shechted it, and and again, if you shechted it, because everybody agrees under this read that while it's traveling, it certainly would not be kosher to have kodshe kodshim. And so when we say that it's kosher, so it must have been shechted after you set up the altar. But if we set up the altar and the Mishkan itself is not set up, Ha be'ezehu mikomen, we saw in the last perek, b'shlamim, when it comes to a korban shlamim, this was on Daf Nun Hey Amud Bet, shishchatan kodem she'amidu leviim, that if you slaughter a shlamim before the Levites set up the Mishkan, psulin, it's puzzle. And presumably that would be true for other korbanot. So Rashi then continues and says, you know what? Maybe you can say that this second one is referring to the situation where you mix up the order, and maybe you can say that when we say that that the shlamim needs to be shechted, it's only for the shlamim. So that's how Rashi continues to say. But the bottom line is that the simplest way to understand the answer that we just gave is that one is referring to one of the places is referring when the Mishkan is fully standing, and one is referring to when the Mishkan has been taken apart, but the Mizbeach is still standing. And so as a result, it could be referring to even Kodshe Kodshim, and it's still going to be possible for Abaye's statement to be true, that when it comes to Kodshim Kalim, if the Mishkan has been completely dismantled, including the Mizbeach, well, then it's going to be puzzle, and you're not going to be able to eat that meat.
It just seems logical. If you build a house, you build the outside first, and then you put the furniture inside.
Correct. Indeed, that is exactly there. When we get to the end of Sefer Shmos, and Bitzalel doesn't do exactly the order that Moshe told him how to construct things. And it's because, according to the Midrash, Bitzalel says back to Moshe, hey, you told me to do the holiest items first, but in fact, we shouldn't do them first. We need to have a place for them to go. And so as a result, when it comes to the actual construction, he does the outside of the Mishkan first. So that way, when the Aron and the Mizbechot are created, they have a place to go. And so exactly like you said, you don't build the furniture before you build the house. First you build the house, then you build the furniture, because you don't want the furniture staying outside when the house isn't ready. So okay, the aim of
Or the hefach that chavala, but you hear stories of tornadoes that destroy the house and the furniture is still outside the
yeah,
wind and the
yeah,
rain and snow, whatever it is.
100%, 100%. Ve'ema hachinami. 1 second. So back into the Gemara. So we are now on the third line of Samach Aleph Amud Bet, and we had just said that the reason that we needed this brisa to tell us that not only when the Mishkan is standing, but even when the Mishkan is taken down, but the Mizbeach is still standing, that you can eat kodshe kodshim, is because I might have thought that once the walls come down, it's as if you took the meat outside the courtyard. And for kachim kachim, meat can't go outside the courtyard. And therefore, if you take it outside the courtyard, you're effectively going to be making it puzzle. So and with the Gemara, and so we explained Kamash Malan. That's why the Brisa tells us that even when the walls of the Mishkan have been taken down, as long as the Mizbeach of the Mishkan is still standing, it's going to be kosher. And the Gemara now says, well, 1 second, maybe your Hava Amina is the right conclusion. The Ema Hakinami. Maybe really, when you take the walls down, it's as if you take the Koche Kochem outside of the courtyard. And so as a result, it should be puzzle. So Amar Kra Vinasa Oel Moed. No. The reason, and this is the quote that that we referenced before in Rashi, that when it says that this is a pasuk in Bamidbar Perek Bet pasuk Yud Zayin, where it says that the tent of meeting, the Oel Moed, is going to journey. So what does it mean? What does that show? Af al pi shenasa, even when it's traveling, Oel Moed it's still considered an Oel Moed. And therefore, the concept of having taken, of Yotze, of having taken out the meat from the Mishkan will continue to apply. And if you leave the meat in the area around where the Mizbeach is, so then it would stay kosher and you can still eat it. And so specifically, the bottom line is that even though the Oel Moed's tents and canopies and all the rest have been taken down, as long as the Mizbeach is still in its place, you can still continue to eat, obviously, Kodshim Kalim, but even Kodshe Kodshim is the way we're going to understand this brisa. Again, there are now multiple ways to understand the brisa, so we would have to know which way that we paskin like in order to conclude. But the bottom line is that we have defended Abaye's statement to Rebbe Yirmiyah's challenge.
Wasn't it like the Mizbeach is now out in the wild by itself?
Well,
Once you removed all the appurtenances that surrounded it, got a Mizbeach out
correct.
in
Well,
the
now
field.
that is to some degree correct, but remember, this is all as part of the process of moving the entire camp. So remember that the process goes as follows, right? So first, the cloud disappears. or rises. So we now know that we're going to need to move the encampment. And so we then go to, and so the process begins to remove all of the
Right.
walls, etc. So it's part of the process, meaning along the way, you can imagine that somebody made a delicious, a hamburger sandwich or whatever kind of meat sandwich, and they're looking forward to eating it. The cloud lifts and everybody starts traveling, and the guy's like, I want to eat my sandwich. And so the point is even though the Levium are beginning to dismantle the courtyard, he can continue to eat that sandwich until the Bnei Kahat pick up the Mizbeach and say, okay, we're now traveling with the Mizbeach. And the first two camps have already left. The I think it was the tribe of Ruvain is the leader of the first camp. Yehuda is the leader of the second camp. And so Ruvain and his tribes go first, and then Yehuda and his tribes go second. And now Bnei Kahat are picking up and taking everything with them. It was all a choreographed process. And so during the course of the choreography, you're right that there would be moments when the Aron would be sort of standing out there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not being guarded. It's not, there aren't people that are working with it. They're setting everything up so that they can, when it's time for them to move, they can then pick it up and move with the rest of the camp. So it's not, again, it's not just like being left out there and there's nobody there with it. The Bnei Kahat are there with it ready to move, but they're waiting for the tribe of Yehuda and its other co-tribes to go and continue on the journey so that they can be smack in the middle, right? The idea is that even when the traveling is happening, the Aron is just like it's in the middle of the camp in the encampment stage. It's also in the middle of the camp while the tribes are traveling. There are six tribes ahead of it and six tribes behind it.
But
And
I'm wondering, is there a time frame? Listen, a person's on the street, says with the bus driver, can you wait for me? Got to go back and get another piece of luggage. This fellow wants to sit and eat his steak and in leisure fashion. Do they give him a half an hour, a day? I mean,
Well, the good news is that if assuming you get knowledge, when the cloud lifts. I am sure it was not. It took hours for the tribes to pack up all their belongings because it could happen at a moment's notice that they would need to leave. So, even if you stay, with all of your, first of all, they didn't have much luggage because, their clothing pretty much grew with them, according to the Midrash.
according to the Rashi brings that for 40 years, and their clothes,
Exactly,
they grew in their
exactly.
clothes.
So
They dried, they're ironed, they're washed, whatever.
correct. So if we stick with that, there wasn't much for them to take, but presumably they had some kind of bedding, etc. So it's and of course when you have 3 million people because it's 600,000 adults between the age of 20 and 60. So you have roughly 3 million people. It takes some time for 150,000 of the men, along with so 1/4 of 3 million is 750,000. It takes some time for 750,000 people of all different ages to pick up and start traveling. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure it took some time. The bottom line is that he definitely had time to finish that sandwich. But you're right. I mean, it's an interesting question as to exactly how long. I don't think we have anywhere explicit how long it took, but it would be interesting to have gotten that record. That would be an interesting record to have. Okay, so that was topic number one for today, and now we come to topic number two. So, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav, we've got something else that we're going to tell you about this Mizbeach in the Beit HaMikdash. Or the Beis Meach, even before you get to the Beis HaMikdash. Mizbeach shel Shiloh shel Avanim haya. The Mizbeach that was done in Shiloh was made of stones. Now let's go over the process. There were four different general locations for the Mishkan slash Beis Hamikdash. First, it was in Gilgal for 14 years. Then it was in Shiloh for 369 years. Then it was in Nov and Giv'on for 59 years. And then in the fourth year of Melech Shlomo's reign, it then went to Yerushalayim, and then we had the Beit HaMikdash. So before that, it was effectively the Mishkan. And so what we're saying now is that the Mishkan in Shiloh was not the Mizbeach that Moshe created. It was a Mizbeach of stones. And that makes a lot of sense. If you were going to have something that stands for 369 years, it makes sense that it's not made of copper and metal. Titania, and we have, because a brisa that supports this, Rabbi Eliezer Ben Yaakov Omer, Ma Talmud Lomer Avanim 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 Shalosh Pamim. Why does the Torah specifically reference stones in connection with the Mizbeh three different times? Specifically, it says in the in Sefer Shmos, shortly after the Aseres HaDibros, im mizbach avanim taseli. If you make an altar of stones, so that's one reference. And then the second and the third are both at the end of Sefer Dvarim, where it says uvanisa sham mizbeach laHashem elokecha mizbach avanim. That when you build the altar for Hashem in the place where Hashem is going to tell you that you build it an altar of stones. Avanim shleimos tivneh es mizbach Hashem elokecha, and it says that you should use whole stones in the building of the altar of Hashem. So why does it reference it three times? Echad shel Shiloh, one to reference to Shiloh, Echad shel No v'Givon, uveis olamim, and one for the Beis Hamikdash itself, the permanent Beis Hamikdash. So Masif Rav Acha Bar Ami says, 1 second, I have another brisa that seems to disagree with this brisa, with Rav Huna. Now note that the brisa of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov only says that it can be made of stone. It doesn't say that it was made of stone. So, but the bottom line is now we're going to have a brisa that seems to say that it was the same mizbeach that Moshe made. So, Eisha Yarda Mina Shemayim Bimei Moshe, the fire that went down to the altar and burned on the altar in the days of Moshe, lo nistalka mi'al mizbach hanechoshes ela bimei Shlomo. It was never removed from the copper altar, which is the altar that Moshe made, until the days of Shlomo. The Esha Yarda b'imei Shlomo, and then the new fire that went down in the days of Shlomo and burned on the altar that Shlomo built, lo nistalka ad sheba Menashe v'Silka, and it did not leave until Menashe came, the evil Menashe came, and the king, and removed it. V'im Isa. Now, if in fact what Rav Huna said is true, mi karahu de'istalik le, it left much earlier because you would have needed to change the Mizbeach's fire from the Mizbeach of Moshe to the Mizbeach of Avanim that was in Shiloh, and so it wouldn't have lasted all the way until Shlomo.
You're saying the fire itself persisted all those years?
Yes, yes.
They were moving the altar. They covered it, and it was fire burning?
Yes, miraculously.
And it didn't burn the parchment or whatever the cover it.
Correct. The miraculous fire from Hashem. So who the Amar Rabbi Nassan? So Rav Huna follows Rabbi Nassan. It's a Tanya. Rabbi Nassan Omer Mizbeach Shel Shiloh Shel Nechoshes Hayachalul Umali Avanim. That when it says, and indeed you can say that when Rav Huna says that it was made of stones, he's not saying that it wasn't actually copper covered. In fact, it makes a lot of sense because of copper's protective nature to have a mizbeach of copper. You as a doctor can I'm sure tell us all the nice advantages of copper, but in any event, the bottom line is that the altar was hollow and filled with stones, and so clearly that wasn't the mizbeach that Moshe created. Moshe created effectively a fully copper Mizbeach. And so again, even according to Rabbi Natan, he would disagree with the brisa that Rav Acha Bar Ami quoted. And Rabbi Natan, being a Tana, is totally legitimate to disagree with the brisa that Rabbi Achabar Ami quoted. So that's how we can understand it. As let's take a look at Rashi. Huda Amar, um, uh, Rav Huna. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi on Samach Aleph on the bed. Huda Amar, Rav Huna. The Amar Rabbi Natan. Rav Huna will agree with Rabbi Natan. V'hadalo Amrinan Hu the Amar Rebbe Lazar ben Yaakov. And the fact that he doesn't, we don't just say that he agrees with Rebbe Lazar ben Yaakov, right? After all, it seems like Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov also supports the idea that the Mizbeach in Shiloh was made of stones. So that with the fact that we don't say that, Mishum de Rabbi Nut, the Hadal Amrinan, who the Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, Mishum de Rabbi Natan, who de Shaminan le Beheja Maisa Hayakach. That in fact, Rabbi Natan's point is that he shows that in fact it was made with stones. Avam de Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov lo shaminan ella de hochshar b'shalavanim. But Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov is saying is that it's just okay if it had been made, but not telling us what the facts were. So bottom line is we see that in fact it was that there's a disagreement as to whether or not the mizbeach in Shiloh was the same mizbeach that Moshe made or a different one. So
when it says shel nechoshet haya, that's of Rabbi Natan. He says it was of. Then he says chalul u'malei avanim. So
yes, meaning that it isn't the same mizbeach as the one Moshe made. It does have nechoshes, so it has a property in common with the mizbeach of Moshe. But the bottom line is, it's not the mizbeach of Moshe. Moshe's mizbeach was not filled with stones.
So where was the nechoshet? Around it, so like it covering, is that it?
Yeah, it's like a covering, 100%. It's like a covering on top. And again, right, if I understand my correctly, nechoshes has some properties that it's difficult to contaminate.
Right, that's
And
right.
so it makes a lot of sense that if you're going to have lots of animals up there, you want to have a copper covering to the mizbeach.
Protection, right.
So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar. So now we go back into the Gemara, basically smack in the middle of Samach Aleph Amud Bet. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar, my loan is stalka. Now, you know what? We can understand the Baraisa that presented a problem in a different way. That we don't have to understand that when we say that the fire didn't leave the Mizbeach. What do we mean is lo nistalka levatla. It didn't leave it completely. And what does Rashi say? Next Rashi that we were just doing is opposite that goes back on the left-hand side of the page. Lo nistalka levatla shetehe betelim mizbeach hanechoshes legamri. You know what? Moshe's altar continued to exist, and there was sometimes still a fire on it. So Mahi, what do you mean by that, Rav Nachman? So Rabbanan Amri, so two explanations of what Rav Nachman could have meant, that it didn't go away completely. Answer number one by the rabbis, Shaviva Hava Mishadra, that it would have sparks go from the Mizbeach of Moshe to the Mizbeach in Shiloh. And so as a result, it effectively was still always on fire. Rav Papa Amar, Rav Papa gives a different answer. Ushpiza haba nakat bezimnin hacha bezimnin hacha. No, there was only one fire from God. And that fire, it wasn't like it just sent out sparks to the Mizbeach of Shiloh, as the rabbi said, but rather sometimes it would be on the Mizbeach in Shiloh, and sometimes it would jump back to the Mizbeach of Moshe. But that's what it means by what it never left it completely. It would be depending on what they were doing. You know, if they needed the fire on the Mizbeach in Shiloh, well, then it would be on the Mizbeach in Shiloh. When they weren't needing it, it would go back to the Mizbeach Nechoshes of Moshe, and presumably they were standing right next to one another. And so that's how it would continue to exist. In fact, let's take a look at Rashi.
Why would they need two mizbeach then?
They
According to that
didn't.
opinion.
They wouldn't have needed it. It just was a remembrance of the fact that we have here the Mizbeach of Moshe.
It sounds
Shaviva.
like the sneh inenu ukal, the burning
Yes,
bush.
100%. It's absolutely exactly like that. Definitely. Shaviva hava mishadra kishahayu maktirin al shal avanim. When they were burning things on this is according to the rabbi's explanation, when they were burning things on the stone altar, hayu zikim Lavos Yotzus Me'esh Shamayim Sha'al Mizbach HaNechosha Shel Moshe. There would be sparks going from the Mizbeach of Nechoshas that Moshe had, Sha'avhu Munach Sham, because it too was placed there in Shiloh. And of course, according to Rav Papa, you have the same concept, just as opposed to the fire always being on the Mizbeach of
No.
Moshe, and then shooting fire as needed to the other Mizbeach, the fire from Hashem would go from one to the other. So that way the fire would be participating in the burning of the sacrifices wherever it was. So those are the two different interpretations. And so now we get to the next topic. And we previously discussed the size of the altar, that it's 32 amot by 32 amot in the second temple. But now we note how this size relates to the size of the altar in the first temple. In fact, we had a problem because I couldn't get the math right in connection with when we said that the mizbeach that Shlomo made what had a space for burning olot of 20 by 20, and I couldn't figure out how it was. This Gemara is going to help us understand that. So Tnan Hasam, Ukesha Alu B'nei Hagola, when the children of the exile went up back to Eretz Yisrael to return to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash, Hosifu alav arba amos min adarum arba amos min amarav. They added 4 amos to the mizbeach on the south side and on the west side, kamin gamma, like the Greek letter gamma, meaning again like effectively a letter L if we view north to the top and south to the bottom. So my timer, what was the reason that they needed to do this? Meaning, why did they add to the space? So we are going to not get to that the conclusion today because we'll end exactly where Eli picks up, God willing, in his recording that he's already done for tomorrow. But my timer, so Amar Rav Yosef, Mishum Delo Sapek. There wasn't enough space. We needed more space on the altar to bring more sacrifices. Amar le Abaye, Abaye says to Rav Yosef, Hashta Mikdash Rishon, Diksiv be Yehuda v'Yisrael, Rabim Kechol Asher al Sfas Hayam. That 1 second, we have the pasuk says that I'm not sure whether maybe this Sfas is not supposed to be there. So this pasuk says that you know there's so many Jewish people. This is a pasuk in Melachim Aleph, Perek Dalid. Yeah, it says Kechol Asher Al Hayam is that is the language. So it's not doesn't say the word Sfas, so that's why the Sfas is in parentheses. So you should take that out. So again, there were so many Jewish people that it was like the sand of the sea in the first Beis Hamikdash, and yet Sapek it was sufficient for their for them to have a 20 by 20 space. Mikdasheni diksivbe kola kahal keechad arba ribo. When in the second Beis Hamikdash, where all there was 42,000 42,360 as the pasuk continues. Kol kahal ke'echad arba ribo, meaning 4 10,000s, 4 myriad, that's 40,000. Alpayim, 2,000, so that's 42,000. Shlosh me'ot v'shishim, this is a pasuk in Ezra. So lo sapek, and now you're going to tell me it wasn't the size of the mizbeach wasn't large enough? So Amar le hasam eish shel shamayim misayatan. As we know, as we've just discussing, and this is the one way in which it connects to the immediately preceding discussion, there was the fire from Hashem that was on the Mizbeach in the first Beis Hamikdash. And so as a result, that fire burned things more quickly. Hacha Ein eshel shamayim misiyatan. But here we in the second base of English, the fire from heaven did not help them, and therefore there was a need for more space in order to burn everything because things burned more slowly. Now we are going to have two more answers to this. And indeed, Rabbi Yosef is going to, who forgot his learning, as we will see at the tomorrow, is going to give us the third answer, and he's going to basically reject the answer that we just gave. You can see that I've got it on the screen, but I learned that Ellie picked up from right here on in his recording. So I will end here and leave for you as a cliffhanger what the other two answers are. And I look forward to continuing our learning, God willing, tomorrow, God willing, this coming week. And I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.
So we're stopping here. Where Kiata Rabin?
Exactly, Kiata Rabin. Exactly, Kiata Rabin. That's exactly where he's going to pick up in his recording, which hopefully is already on the website. If it's not, it will be there. God willing, by the end, God willing, by the end of the day today. And if not, the end of the day today. So then it'll be there. Early part of next week, and
So,
he'll.
so, so we're saying here that the first temple was Hashtem Mikdash Rishon. It was uh like the sands of the Tatipa were like the sands of the sea. Is that what we're saying? And
That's
then
how many Jewish people there were.
right,
Correct. That there were so many Jewish people, and yet a 20 by 20 surface area was sufficient. And now in the second base of Migdash, we end up saying that there's a 24 by 24 surface area. And again, how we get from 32 to 24 is the following. There's one amma on either side for the base. So that takes you from 32 to 30. There's one amma on both sides, on all sides for the ledge. So that takes you from 30 to 28. Um, then there's one amma that is the space where the four horns of the Mizbeach are located. So that takes us from 28 to 26. And then there is one amma around the entire surface where the Kohanim could walk on the surface of the altar. And so that takes us from 26 to 24. And again, the same math works, but starting from 28 by 28 in connection with the original altar. And so that's why the space on the original altar was 20 by 20, and in the first base of Mikdash, and the space on the second in the second base of Mikdash was 24 by 24.
it was 20 by 20 in the first one.
Correct.
And
Remember, that was the math that we were doing
right,
between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, where Rabbi Yossi said that there was only one amma by one amma on the Mizbeach of Moshe. And so when Melech Shlomo was able to do 1,000 sacrifices in that one amma, so presumably he could do 400,000 sacrifices on the 20 by 20, which is 400 square amot.
right,
And so that's why, according to Rabbi Yossi, you didn't need to use the floor of the
right.
Azara. And remember, Rabbi Yehuda said no, it wasn't 5 by 5, it was 10 by 10. 10 by 10 means that it was a 36 square amos where he did the 1,000 sacrifices. And when you do 36 1,000 sacrifices on 36 square amos, and then you up that to 400 square amos, so that means you could do about 11,000 sacrifices. But he brought 142,000. So as a result, he needed to use the floor of the Azara. And so that was the whole debate that we had. But I couldn't figure out how you got from 32 to 20. And the answer is you don't go from 32 to 20. You go from 28 to 20, because that we're talking about the first base of Migdash. And in the second base of Migdash, it was 32 by 32. And so as a result, the space would be 24 by 24.
Wait, you go from 32 to 28 because the
Correct. One amma on both sides
right, right,
for the base, one amma
right,
on both sides for the ledge, one amma on both sides for the
right.
horns, and one amma on both sides for the space to walk. Those are four ammas on every side, so that's a reduction by 8. 32 minus 8 is 24.
So what's the 28?
28 was the size of the Mizbeach in the first Beis Hamikdash. That was the language that we just had, that they went from a 28 by 28 Mizbeach in the first Beis Hamikdash to adding 4 amos on the south side and on the west side, and that made it 32 by 32. And
Oh,
so,
so it
so the
was
first,
28 by 28. I mean, it was
well,
28.
including the base, etc., including everything. It was 28 by 28 in the first Beis Hamikdash,
Right.
and 32 28 by 28 in the first Beis Hamikdash, and 32 by 32 in the second Beis Hamikdash. Okay.
Then
Have
wait,
a
wait a second. Then how do we get to, so what's the 24 by 24 then?
24 is the space on the altar where the fire can burn and you can bring olot. Because again, we take off 1 amma
Right, right,
for the base, 1 amma for the ledge, one
right,
amma
right,
for
right.
the
I
horns,
understand
one
that.
amma for the walking. That's 4 amos on all
Right.
sides. So that's 8 amos in each direction. So therefore, 32 by 32 minus 8 becomes
Right.
24 by 24.
So that's the second Beit HaMikdash?
That's the
Second.
second Beit HaMikdash, correct.
Okay. And
And
then,
the first Beis Hamikdash was 28 by 28 with a space for burning of 20 by 20. And the second Beis Hamikdash is 32 by 32 with a space for burning olot and other whatever other sacrifices of 24 by 24.
so wasn't there more space in the second one with
Yes,
almost
there's
Beit?
more space in the second Beis Hamikdash. And now what we're trying to do
So
right now is
what's the
explain
problem?
why.
So right, so there's more space. So why would there be a problem with the sacrifice? I had this didn't quite understand this earlier when we discussed it a few days ago, a week ago. Why would if there's more space, then why is this? Why was it the machlokas with Rabbi Yehuda saying that he had
Well,
to
first of all,
put people
the machlokas between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda is about the first Beis Hamikdash when it was a 20 by 20 space to burn.
Oh, it's about the first one. So there wasn't enough
Correct.
space for all the korbanot.
Correct. Because it's talking, right? The machlokas is about what did Shlomo need to do when he burned the 142,000 sacrifices, and that's obviously the first Beis Hamikdash because that was Shlomo.
So he needed more. He
So
needed
according
more.
to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the Mizbeach of Moshe was larger, so you needed more space. But according to Rabbi Yossi, who says the Mizbeach of Moshe was very small and yet could do 1,000 sacrifices on it, you didn't need any extra space. 20 by 20 was more than sufficient. And so that's the machlokas.
So, I see. So he said, Rabbi Yehuda said you needed more. So there wasn't enough space for the.
For the burning of the burning of all the sacrifices. You can say hello to my dad.
Hi, good morning, and have a good Shabbos.
Right. Okay. It's okay. So we're talking about the first bit. That's the one.
Exactly. That was talking about the first Beis Hamikdash. Exactly. That was, and the point is that what we learned just now is the fact that the Mizbeach in the second Beis Hamikdash was 4 amos wider and longer than the Mizbeach in the first Beis Hamikdash.
So there was no problem in the second Beit HaMikdash. There
No,
was
certainly no
space.
problem in the second Beis Hamikdash. And what we're asking right now is, well, why did they make it bigger? After all, you didn't need more for more people. There were way fewer people in Israel at the time. It was 42,360 people. So why did you need it? And so Rav Yossi's first answer is to say, no, well, there was no fire from Hashem. So as a result, everything burned more slowly. And so that's why you needed more space. But we're going to reject that answer. We're going to offer two different other answers,
Right.
including
Okay.
one by Rav Yosef himself. And that, again, Rav Yosef will be retracting his original answer and say that the bottom line is going to be that we actually have a drasha that the people in the first Beis Hamikdash didn't realize how you could understand the drasha, and as a result, now they in the second Beis Hamikdash they realized the drasha, and as a result expanded the space of the Beis Hamikdash. And in fact, it could be even further larger. They just chose a different amount in order to not use up all of the space that they could have used, but they made it somewhat larger.
All right.
All right, so that's a forecast, a preview of what, God willing, you will see tomorrow. And again, that's already on the screen, so you can take a look at it there. I'm going to stop my sharing and wish you a very good Shabbos, and looking forward to continuing our learning together.